My grandson had not spoken one word to me in 4 years, and on the first cold morning of October, he came up my cattle guard before daylight in a truck that was not his, walked into my kitchen without knocking, and told me to put my pen down and not sign another thing until he showed me what was in the toolbox. I set the pen on the table next to a stack of papers I had already signed 40 or 50 times over the last 6 years, and I asked him what he thought he was looking at. He said, "Grandpa, how many of those have you signed?" And I could not tell him. That is where this starts. And I want you to understand something before I go on. I was not a foolish man. I was a careful man. That is the part that still keeps me up. My name is Hollis Rand. I am 78 years old. I live 22 miles outside a town called Alameda in Canada County, New Mexico, in a house my father framed with his own hands the summer before Korea. For 31 years, I was a brand inspector for the New Mexico Livestock Board. Before that and after that, I ran cattle on this place. Reading brands was my trade. Knowing who a thing belongs to was my trade. Hold on to that, because the joke at the bottom of this story is a hard one. Before I take you any further, I want to ask you something, and I mean it plain. Whose voice do you still hear in your head when you do a job the right way? Not the loud voice, the quiet one, the one that says no, do it over, do it properly. Put that name down in the comments for me tonight, and tell me what town they would be sitting in right now if they were still around to sit anywhere. I read those. I have gotten to where I look forward to them more than I look forward to the mail. Now, the iron. On the wall of my shop, on a 16-penny nail my father drove in 1951, hangs a branding iron he forged himself out of a wagon rod. It makes a mark shaped like a letter H standing on a little curved rocker like a chair leg. That is our brand. The Rocking H. It has been recorded to this family since the year my father came home from the service, and every 3 years of my adult life I have driven to town and paid the fee and renewed it, the way you renew a thing that is yours. We have a ritual with that iron, and my father started it, and I never once let it drop. On the first morning of October, cold enough to see your breath, we build a little fire in a wash tub out by the corner of the horse trap. We heat that iron one time, and we burn the year into the corner cedar post. Just the year. 2 numbers. That post has been standing since 1951, and it is black with 60 and some odd years of Octobers, one on top of another, all the way down to the ground. My father taught me to brand the way his father taught him, and there is one rule that matters more than all the rest of it put together. You do not press. You rock it. You lay the iron on and you roll it heel to toe, easy, and you count, and you lift. Press a hot iron down flat and it burns deep in the middle and hardly at all on the edges, and what you get is a blotch. And here's the thing about a blotch. It is not a wrong brand. It is not somebody else's brand. It is nothing. It cannot be read. And a mark that cannot be read belongs to nobody at all. My grandson Wade burned his first post when he was 9 years old. He was so scared of that iron that he pressed it hard and held it, and when he pulled it off, there was a black smear on the cedar that could have been anything on God's earth. He cried so hard, he got the hiccups. My wife Dobie came out with a dish towel over her shoulder and stood there with her hand on his neck and did not say one word because she knew that some things a boy has to feel all the way through. I never pulled that post. 41 years of clean years on the corner post, and one blotch, 1996 or thereabouts, sitting there in the row like a missed note. Every man who ever leaned on that fence has asked me about it. I have my answer ready, and I will get to it before we are done. Dovie died 4 years ago in April. Kidney thing that turned into a heart thing. She had kept the books on this place for 46 years in a green ledger with a rubber band around it, and when we buried her, I was 74 years old, and I had never once in my life written a check to the feed store. That is the door. That is the exact door I left standing open. And I want to be fair because I'm going to say some hard things about a person later on, and a man ought to pay what he owes first. My daughter-in-law Camille sat in that hospital in Alamogordo for 19 nights. 19. She slept in a vinyl chair. She washed my wife's hair in a plastic basin the week before the end because Dovie could not stand the smell of the hospital on herself. My son did not do that. I did not do that. She did. So when she said, "Hollis, let me take the books off you. You have got enough," I did not hear a woman reaching for something. I heard the woman who washed my wife's hair. Camille had run a title office in Roswell for 11 years before she married my son. She knew what a legal description was. She knew what a lien was. When she talked about paperwork, she used the right words in the right order, and after a lifetime of watching men fumble a bill of sale, I will admit that was restful to me. My son Neil is 52. He is not a bad man, and I am not going to let you think he is. There are 4 words my son cannot get out of his mouth, and they are, "I do not understand." That is the whole of his trouble, and it fits on one line. 2 years before his mother died, he went in on a feedlot deal with a fellow out of Clovis and lost about $190,000, and instead of coming to me, he went quiet for 8 months and let it eat him. Camille was the one who finally told me. She told me kindly. She told me while he was out of the room. So we set it up. The three of us at my kitchen table on Sunday afternoons. She brought a canvas bag with a zipper, and she took out a stack of papers, and she put them in front of me one stack at a time and said, "These are the consignment slips, Dad, and these are the vet invoices, and this one is the fuel account." And I signed. I am going to say the next part slowly because it is the only real sin in this whole story that belongs to me. I signed the stack. I did not read the top line of every page. I read the top page. Then I signed down through the pile the way you sign a Christmas card list, and she squared them up and put them back in the canvas bag, and we had pie. 6 years of Sundays. That is somewhere north of 300 afternoons. And the whole time, the place ran. That is what I need you to understand about how a thing like this hides. The lights stayed on. The pump on the north well got rebuilt. The calves went out in October, and money came back in November, and a check with my name on it went into my account at the bank in Alameda every single year, and I deposited it, and I did not compare it against anything, because what would I compare it against? Dobie's green ledger was in a drawer with a rubber band around it, and I could not open that drawer without having to sit down. Now, Wade is 23. He is Neil's boy. From the time he could walk, he was my shadow, and I do not say that the way old men say it. I mean, he was physically behind me all day, every day, from 6 in the morning until his mother hollered. He rode with me on inspections. He learned to read a brand upside down through a squeeze chute before he learned long division. He went up to school at 19, down at a college in Texas that teaches range science, and for about 6 months he called on Sunday nights. And then the calls got thin, and then they stopped. I want to tell you exactly how a family gets taken apart, because it is not with a lie you could catch. Camille would say, "I talked to Wade. He is real busy." Then, a month later, I talked to Wade, and I do not want to repeat what he said about the place. Then, later still, standing at my sink with her back to me, she would say, "He told me he does not want a ranch, Dad. He told me he is embarrassed by all of it, and I think he is embarrassed by you a little, and I am sorry, I should not have said that." And I would go outside and stand in the dark. Meanwhile, she was telling that boy down there 400 miles away that his grandfather said he had gone off and gotten too good for us. That his grandfather said, "Do not come back around here with your opinions." That his grandfather had said, and this is the one that got him, that Wade was not going to be handed 1 acre of anything. Neither one of us ever heard the other one say a word. There was a person standing in the middle, taking the messages. So on that October morning, when a boy I had not seen in 4 years came up my cattle guard in the dark, I did not go to the door happy. I went to the door with my chest tight because I did not know which version of him was going to be standing there. He looked at me a long time. Then he said, "I need to know one thing first. Did you ever tell anybody I was not going to get a foot of this place?" I said, "Son, I have got a paper in a lockbox in town with your name on it that I signed the year you were born." He put his hand over his mouth and turned around and faced the yard for a while. Then he said, "Get your coat." The truck he came in belonged to the ranch. It was the old flatbed, the one with the diamond plate toolbox across the headache rack. He had been sent to Roswell in it 2 days before to pick up a hydraulic hose, which tells you something all by itself, because Wade was not supposed to be working here at all. He had come home in August, quietly, and his mother had put him on the payroll and told him not to bother me because I was tired. He got the toolbox open and stood back. It was not tools. It was a plastic file crate with a lid, and inside the crate were manila folders, and in those folders were 6 years of brand inspection certificates. And on the authorization stapled to the front of every one of them was my signature. Some of them I had signed, and some of them I had not. We carried that crate into the kitchen and put it on the table where the pie used to go, and I made coffee, and then I sat down and did the only thing I have ever been any good at. I need to explain something first, and I am going to keep it simple, because if you did not grow up around livestock, there is no reason on earth you would know it. In this state, a brand is not decoration. A recorded brand is property. You own it the way you own a truck. It is recorded with the livestock board, in a book, under a name, and it can be sold or inherited, and it has to be renewed or it lapses. And cattle wearing a recorded brand do not move, not to a sale barn, not across a county line, not out of state, not into somebody else's truck, without a brand inspection. An inspector comes, he reads the hide, he opens his book, and he writes a certificate. And before he writes it, he has to satisfy himself of one thing above all others: that the person shipping those cattle has the authority of the recorded owner. the recorded owner of the rocking H, on that October morning was me. It had been me since 1972. So I sat there with a cup of coffee going cold, and I read 6 years of certificates in order, oldest to newest, the way you read a fence line, one post at a time. And the story they told was this. For the first 2 years, everything squared up. The counts matched what I remembered. The dates matched what I remembered. My signature on the authorizations was my signature. Then, about 4 years back, the shipments started coming in twos. A load in October like always, and then a second load in February, and another one in May and one in July, small ones, 30 and 40 head, going to a buyer down at a yard in Texas that I had never in my life done business with. And on those, my signature was not mine. I want to tell you how I knew, because it is a small, stupid thing, and small, stupid things are what the whole world actually turns on. When I fill out a form fast, I do not cross the H in Hollis. I have not crossed it since about 1980. 31 years of inspection books, 40 carbons a week in the heat with a horse standing on your foot, and you learn to loop that letter and keep moving. My H is a loop with a tail on it. It looks like a bad number 6. Every one of those winter and summer authorizations had a beautiful, careful, crossed H. She had traced it. Somebody had traced it. Traced it well, too, but they had traced it from a document where I had been sitting down with time on my hands, and they had made it neat, and neat was the tell. I am going to tell you what I felt, and it is not what you would guess. I felt relief. I sat in that chair, my eyes went hot, my hands started shaking, and the feeling that came up through me first, before any anger at all, was pure relief. Because for about 2 years I had been quietly, privately terrified that something was wrong with my head. I had been finding numbers that did not sit right, and losing the thread of them by supper. I had stood in the barn twice, and could not account for a whole set of heifers, and I had told myself, well, Hollis, that is what 76 looks like, and I had not said one word about it to a living soul because I was afraid of what my son would do with it. So the first thing I felt was, thank God. Thank God, my mind is fine, somebody's been lying to me. That is a terrible way to be grateful. But I have talked to enough people my age now to know I am not the only one who has felt it. Wade let me sit there. He did not say anything for a long while, and then he said the thing that started the clock. He said, Grandpa, there is a reason I came today and not next week. I said, all right, he said. The trucks are booked for the 10th. 4 semis out of Hereford, the whole calf crop and the older cows both, everything that will walk up a chute. Month over month has got the pen set for daylight, and she has got a fellow coming from the newspaper. I said, the newspaper. He said, they are taking a picture. There is a company buying the place, Grandpa. Papers are already drawn. It is a hunting outfit out of Dallas. Closing is set for the 15th. 5 days after the cattle leave. And I sat there in my own kitchen, in the house my father framed, and I understood that I was not looking at a theft. A theft is a thing that has already happened. I was looking at a schedule. I did what most of you would have done. I got in my pickup, and I drove the 4 miles down to the ranch office, and I walked in with a folder under my arm, and I was not calm. The office is a double wide with a swamp cooler on the roof. Camille had it painted a soft gray, and she kept a jar of butterscotch on the counter for the truck drivers. My son was at the second desk with his back half turned. I put the folder down and I said, I want to know who signed my name. And I want you to hear what happened next, because it is the part people get wrong about how this works. She did not panic. She did not get loud. She did not stumble. She stood up, and she came around the desk, and she opened the second drawer of a black file cabinet, and she started laying paper on that counter next to the butterscotch jar. Articles of organization for a limited liability company filed with the state 4 years ago. My name on it as a member. A management agreement giving her authority over day-to-day operations signed by me. A resolution about livestock marketing signed by me. 6 years of tax returns for the operation signed by me. And a stack of bank statements showing a deposit into my personal account every November. Every one of them cleared. Every one of them mine. Every single piece of it was real. That is the whole point. It was all real. There was nothing to catch her on because she had not built a lie. She had built a floor, one honest board at a time, over 6 years, out of paper I handed her. Then she did the other thing. She got soft. She said, Dad, sit down. She said, when did you last see Dr. Ordonez? She said, you told me in June you could not find the heifers, and I did not make anything of it because I love you. She said, Neil, would you get your father some water? And my son got up and got a paper cup of water and put it in my hand and did not look at me. I stood in that office with a cup of water, and I understood the shape of the thing I was standing in. A lot of people, hearing this, want to know why I did not go straight to the sheriff that afternoon. I have been asked it 100 times since. So here is the answer, and I would like the folks my age to sit with it, because it is the real trap, and almost nobody sees it coming. I was a 78-year-old man whose signature was on every page in that drawer. She was a 50-year-old woman who had run a title office for 11 years and who had 4 years of my own paperwork proving she was the one holding this place together. If I walked into the sheriff's office in Alameda and said, "My daughter-in-law has been forging my name," the first thing that would happen is a deputy would call the ranch, and the second thing that would happen is she would hand him that same drawer. And the third thing, the thing I was truly afraid of, is that a petition would get filed in district court asking a judge to say that Hollis Rand can no longer manage his own affairs. In this state, a judge can appoint a guardian over your person and a conservator over your property, and every accusation I made would sit in that file as evidence of exactly what she was claiming. A confused old man with a story. I have watched it happen to two men I knew. Both of them were right and both of them lost. So I did not accuse her again. I drank the water, I said something about being tired, I picked up my folder, and I drove home at 40 miles an hour with the window down. And about a mile from my own gate, I pulled over on the caliche and sat there with the engine running because I had just thought of the one piece of paper that woman did not have. She had my signature on everything a man signs, but she had never once, in 6 years, gotten me to sign a brand transfer. The Rocking H was still recorded to Hollis Rand, personally, in a book in Albuquerque, not to the company, not to my son, not to her. She had built her whole floor out of authority. She had never gotten around to the ownership, because the ownership was a formality in her mind, a thing with a $14 fee, and formalities are what people like her leave for later. And you cannot ship a branded cow in New Mexico on authority. You ship it on ownership. The next morning, Wade and I drove to the county seat and sat in the waiting room of a lawyer named Marisol Quintana, who I had never met, because every lawyer in Alamito had done work for my family, and I did not want a soul in that town knowing my business before Friday. She was maybe 45. She had a diploma on the wall and a paper cup of green Chile stew on her desk at 9 in the morning, which told me she had been there since 6. She let me talk for 11 minutes without one interruption. Then she asked 3 questions. She asked, "Is the brand recorded to you personally?" I said yes. She asked, "Do you have the renewal receipts?" I said I have every one since 1972 in a shoebox, because I am the kind of man who keeps receipts, and it has never done me one bit of good until right now. She asked, "What land is actually in the company?" And that third question is the one that cracked it open. And here is what she had me do. And I want to be very clear about this part, because I know what people expect from a story like mine. They expect me to sneak back into that office at night. They expect a hidden recorder in a coat pocket. I did not do any of that, and I would not have, and if I had, everything I am about to tell you would have been worth nothing. Everything we used was a public record. Every bit of it. Anybody listening to me could walk in tomorrow and ask for the same papers about their own affairs. We ordered a certified copy of the brand record from the livestock board, showing the Rocking H recorded to Hollis Rand, individual, current, good for another year and a half. We pulled the filings for the limited liability company from the state, which is a thing you can look at on a computer for free. We went to the county clerk and asked for the deeds, not a summary, the instruments themselves with the recording stamps. And we found the purchase agreement, or the shadow of it, because when a big outfit puts land under contract, they will sometimes record a short notice of it so nobody else can slide in. There it was, a recreational holding company out of Dallas, closing the 15th. We had 4 days. Now, before I tell you what was in those deeds, I want to say one thing to you, and then I am going to shut up about it for the rest of the night. If you have got this far with me, and if this is the kind of story you would rather hear than the kind they usually put in front of people our age, go on and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it is the only way an old man talking into a microphone in the desert keeps getting to talk. That is all. Now sit up, because here's where the ground moved. The company owned the deeded ground, 1,240 acres, headquarters, barns, pens, the house I am sitting in as I say this. All of it had gone in 4 years ago on paper I had signed, and I will not pretend otherwise. But it did not own everything. Gate clothing Bradzar. When Dovey's mother died in 1988, she left Dovey a half section over the ridge, 320 acres of nothing much. Rock, cedar, a stock tank, and one windmill over a well that has never in my lifetime gone dry, and a water right on that well that was filed in 1931. Dovey left that half section to me. Just to me. Not to the company because there was no company when she wrote her will, and not to Neil because she had a feeling about something and never said what. And it never went in. Nobody ever moved it. It sat there in the clerk's book under my name alone, 320 acres of rock that no hunting company from Dallas would look at twice. Marisol read the legal description twice, and then she got very still and asked me a question that I had not thought about in 20 years. She asked, "Mr. Rand, what property is your federal grazing permit attached to?" And I said out loud, "In that office? Oh no. Most of this country out here is not owned by anybody. It is federal range, and you do not buy it and you cannot buy it. What you get is a permit to run a set number of cattle on it, and that permit is not a thing that floats loose in the world. It hangs on private property that you own or control, ground with water and feed enough to carry the herd when they come off the mountain. They call that base property. The permit is attached to it the way a shadow is attached to a post. And if the base property changes hands, the preference stays with the base property. It does not follow the cows. It does not follow the brand. It does not follow the man who thinks he bought a ranch." My grazing permit had been qualified since 1968 on the half section over the ridge, the rock, the cedar, the windmill, the 320 acres that were still in my name alone. So here is what a hunting company from Dallas was 5 days away from buying. 1,240 acres of deeded ground with a headquarters on it, sitting in the middle of a federal allotment they would have no permit to use, with no water right on it worth a name, because the water was over the ridge on somebody else's rock. They were about to pay a great deal of money for a very expensive island. I sat in that office, and I will tell you honestly that a low, mean part of me lit right up. Let them. Let the whole thing close on the 15th. Let those people find out in January. Let Camille be standing in a room in Dallas trying to explain to a lawyer why the ranch she sold cannot legally graze one animal. I let myself hold it for about a minute and a half. Then I thought about a woman I had never met who works for that company, who would have signed off on that file and who would lose her job over it. Then I thought about my grandson, standing in the yard at 7 that morning asking me if I had really said he was worthless, and I thought about what he would inherit if I let it happen that way. He would not inherit a ranch. He would inherit 10 years of lawsuits and a last name that nobody in 3 counties would shake hands with. You do not get to be clean and cruel at the same time. You pick. So I told Marisol to do it the boring way. We wrote to the range specialist at the federal office, a woman named Adele Boyer, and asked her one narrow question in writing. What property is the base property for this permit? She wrote back in 3 days on letterhead. It was 2 paragraphs long and it was the most beautiful thing I ever read. We got the certified brand record. We got certified copies of the deed to the half section and the water right filing. Marisol sent the forged authorizations to a document examiner in Albuquerque, and she told me plainly that a real report would take weeks, not days, and that I should stop imagining a man in a courtroom with a magnifying glass. She said the examiner is for later. The examiner is for the district attorney. I said, "Then what stops the trucks on the 10th? And she said, "Mr. Rand, you do. You are the recorded owner, and you will be standing right there." That was the whole plan. That was all of it. There was no ambush in it anywhere. 2 nights before shipping, my telephone rang at 10 minutes after 11. It was Neil. He did not say hello. There was a long stretch of nothing on the line, long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, "Dad, is the corner post still up?" I said, "It is still up, son." He said, "Okay," and he hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while after that. I want to be careful here because I know what it sounds like when a man makes excuses for his own child. Neil signed nothing false. I have never found one document with a forged thing on it in his hand. What he did was worse in one way and better in another. He sat 4 feet away for 4 years and let it happen and got up and got me a paper cup of water. But he asked about the post. That mattered to me, and it still does. The next afternoon, Camille called me herself, sweet as pie, and asked if I would come down to the pens at daylight on Friday and be in the picture. She said, "It would mean a lot to Neil." She said, "And honestly, Dad, people should see you. It is your brand." I said I would be there. And I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen and thought, well, she just did the one thing I could not do for myself. She invited me. Thursday night was the first night of the year cold enough to see your breath. I went out to the shop at about 7, and I took my father's iron off that 16-penny nail, and I built a little fire in the wash tub out by the corner of the horse trap, the way we have done it since before I could walk. I heated the iron. I stood there and watched it come up from black to a dull red. And I got that smell, and there is no smell on this earth like a branding fire in cold air, and if you know it, you are already somewhere else right now. And then I put it back in the tub and let it go out, and I did not burn the year into the post. I could not that night, because burning that year in would have been saying that the year was finished, and I did not know yet what kind of year it was going to turn out to be. So I sat on the tailgate in my coat until the fire went down to nothing, and I talked to my wife a little, the way widowers do and mostly do not admit to. Wade came out at some point and sat down beside me and did not say anything, which is a thing he got from Dovey and not from me. After a while he said, "I read them all again tonight. There is 210 head gone that we cannot account for, over 4 years. I said, I know it. He said, Grandpa, are you going to be able to do this in front of everybody? And I told him the truth, which was that I did not know. Friday morning, the sun came up on 100 people's worth of noise. I have not seen the home pens like that since the 80s. 4 semis back to the loading chute with their diesels running and their lights on and steam coming off the hoods. Portable panels set up in an alley. 2 boys from town working the back gate. Coffee in a 50-cup percolator plugged into the generator on somebody's flatbed, and a card table with store-bought donuts on it that nobody was eating because it was 29 degrees. There were 40 or 50 people there. Neighbors, mostly. Dub Kettner, who runs the feed store, had driven out because Dub has driven out to every shipping day in this valley for 30 years. The fellow from the county paper was there with a camera bag and a knit cap, and there was a woman in a good gray coat and clean boots standing a little apart holding a folder, and I knew before anybody told me that she worked for the buyer. Camille was everywhere at once. She had on a wool coat the color of a rain cloud, and she was shaking hands and pointing out where the truck should sit, and she looked, and I mean this, she looked wonderful. She had the face of somebody arriving at the end of a long piece of work. Neil was down at the chute in a canvas jacket with his collar up, working, not talking. I parked out by the water tank and walked in slow, and people came up and shook my hand and said, "Hollis," and I said, "Morning," and my heart was going about 140. Camille came over and hugged me. She smelled like cold air and hairspray. She said, "I am so glad you came." I said, "Big morning." She said, "It is the right thing, Dad. It is time." And I said, "Who is inspecting?" She waved a hand. She said, "The board sent somebody. They always do." That is the sentence I have thought about most in the 4 years since. The board sent somebody. She had built a floor out of 6 years of paper, and she had thought about everything except the one man who was going to walk up that alley with a book in his hand and do his job. Because in this state, that man is not a formality either. At 6:40 in the morning, a white state pickup came over the cattle guard with a light bar on it and a set of chaps hanging in the back window, and it parked at the head of the alley, and a man got out who was about 55 years old, built like a fence post, with a mustache going gray. And I felt my whole chest let go, because I knew him. His name is Elpidio Barella. Everybody in 6 counties calls him Pete. I trained that man. In 1994, I rode with him for 11 weeks, 5 days a week, and I taught him how to read a running iron job and how to write up a hide with a scar on it and how to say no to a man twice his size at a sale barn on a Saturday. He saw me standing by the water tank and he lifted his chin about an inch. That was all. And I thought, all right, Dad, rock it. Do not press. They ran the first bunch up the alley at 10 till 7. 40 head of black baldy heifers, steam coming off them, hooves ringing on the frozen ground. Pete stepped up on the second rail with his book and started reading hides. That is the job. You do not glance. You read. You stand there in the cold and you look at every animal that goes by and you put down what is on it. And if a brand is blotched or worked or wrong, you stop the whole world until you know why. He got to about the 20th head and he put his pencil down. He got off the rail. He walked back to Camille and I could not hear him from where I stood, but I did not need to. I have said that same sentence 400 times in my life and my mouth knew the shape of it from 30 yards off. "Ma'am, who is the recorded owner of this brand?" She smiled and reached into her folder and handed him a paper. The management agreement, I found out later, her authority, her floor. Pete read it. He read the whole thing, front and back, in 29-degree air with 4 semis idling, and nobody said anything, and the heifers milled and blew steam, and the fellow from the newspaper took a picture of it because he thought it was a nice shot of ranch business getting done. Then Pete folded that paper in half and handed it back to her and said something short. And then he turned around and looked across 40 people and found me standing by the water tank. And he said, loud enough that everything stopped, "Mr. Rand, you are the recorded owner of the Rocking H. Did you authorize this shipment?" I have thought about that moment about as much as any moment in my life. I had 4 days to get ready for it. I had lain awake building speeches. I had a folder in my truck with certified copies in it, and a lawyer parked a quarter-mile down the county road, and I had, I am not lying to you, 3 different versions of a thing I wanted to say to my daughter-in-law in front of the whole valley. I did not use one word of it. I said, "No, sir, I did not." 2 words and a name for a man I trained. I want to tell you what a shipping day sounds like when it stops. The diesels kept running because nobody had thought to shut them off. The cattle kept moving because cattle do not care. But every human being on that place quit talking at the same instant, and I have never in my life heard a quiet with that much weight sitting on it. Pete did not raise his voice one time the whole morning. He walked back to his truck and got on the radio to his district supervisor, and then he came back and he said, "We are not moving these cattle today," and he started writing. That is all it takes. That is the whole thing. There is no judge, there is no jury, there is no lawyer coming through a door. In this state, a brand inspector who is not satisfied about ownership does not write the certificate. And if he does not write the certificate, those animals do not get on a truck, and 4 semis at a Hereford turn around empty. Camille said, "This is a family disagreement," and Pete said, "Yes, ma'am, it might be," and kept writing. She said, "I have a management agreement," and Pete said, "Yes, ma'am, you do," and kept writing. She said, "He is 78 years old." And Pete stopped writing then and looked up at her, and he said, "Ma'am, he taught me," and went back to it. That is when my daughter-in-law turned around and looked at me for the first time that morning, really looked, and I watched her stop being the woman and wash my wife's hair. Now here is the part I planned, and it is the only part I planned, and I want the people listening to hear the principle in it, because it is worth more than the story. I did not walk over and confront Camille. I did not hand her one piece of paper. There was nothing in that folder that would have done anything to her except let her make a speech. Marisol Quintana got out of her car, walked through that crowd in a pair of city shoes, went straight past my son, straight past my daughter-in-law, and put one envelope in the hands of the woman in the good gray coat. Because she was the only person standing in that pasture who could read the papers and kill the deal by lunchtime. You do not aim at the person who wronged you. You aim at the person who can actually do something. Half the ruined old men I have known in my life got that backwards. The woman opened the envelope right there in the cold. Certified copy of a deed to 320 acres, a water right filed in 1931, and 2 paragraphs on federal letterhead saying the grazing preference for this allotment is attached to that base property and stays with it. She read it twice. I watched her get to the second paragraph and stop moving. Then she walked off about 40 feet with the phone against her ear and stood in the bar ditch and talked for maybe 6 minutes and came back and said to Camille in a perfectly pleasant voice, "We are going to need to pause." The deal died standing up in a pasture at 7:20 in the morning. And Camille turned to me with her jaw set and asked, "How long have you known?" I said, "Since Tuesday," she said, "and you let me stand out here." And I said, "No, I let you invite me. I want to be honest with you about what came after, because I have listened to enough of these stories to know that they usually end at the good part, and life does not. The good part lasted about 1 hour. Forging another person's name on a document is a felony in this state, and it does not matter one bit that the person is your father-in-law. Marisol took the file to the district attorney's office 11 days later. The document examiner's report came back in February, 4 months after that morning in the pens, and it was 9 pages long and about as exciting as a phone book, and it said what we already knew. It took 14 months from the day the trucks turned around to the day Camille stood up in a courtroom in the county seat and pled to 2 counts. She got probation and restitution, which is what happens more often than people think when there is no violence and no prior record and a very good lawyer. She pays a number every month that she will still be paying when she is 68 years old. She surrendered her notary commission, and she will not work in a title office again in this state. I did not testify. I sat 4 rows back in a suit I bought in 1991. And when they were done, I did not feel triumphant. I want to be truthful about that. I felt like a man who had spent 14 months in a fluorescent hallway. Neil was not charged. There was nothing to charge him with. He signed no false thing. He simply sat in a room for 4 years and let it happen, because looking straight at it would have cost him those 4 words, and he would rather have paid anything else. He lost his wife to a probation office and his name to a courthouse anyway. Here is what it cost me, in plain numbers, because if I skip this part, I am selling you something. 210 head, gone over 4 years. I got a judgment for part of it, and I will collect some of it, and I will not see the rest. I sold 40 pair in the spring to pay a lawyer and a document examiner, and every one of those cows was a cow I had raised, and I stood at that fence and watched them load, and I did not enjoy 1 second of it. It will take this place about 9 years to get back to where it was in 2019. I am 78. I can do that math as well as you can. And the deeded ground is still in the company, and untangling a limited liability company is slow, expensive, unglamorous work that took another year, and is the reason my grandson knows what a charging order is at 24 years old. But the water is mine, the permit hangs on the water, and the brand is mine. Now, I am not a lawyer, and I would not take advice from a man on a microphone, so go find a real one in your own state before you do anything. But there are 4 things I would say to somebody my age, and I would have paid a great deal to have somebody say them to me at 72. Sign 1 page at a time. Read the top line of every one of them. When somebody puts a stack in front of you and says, "These are just the routine ones," that is not an insult to say no to, that is Tuesday. Keep your own copy, not their copy. Yours, in your own house, in your own box. Know where the record of a thing actually lives, not the story about it, the record. Land is at the county, a brand is at the board, a permit is at the federal office, a will is at the court. Every one of those places will hand a person a certified copy of their own business for a few dollars, and almost nobody ever asks. And get one set of eyes on your affairs that does not eat at your table. A lawyer, an accountant, an old friend who was good at arithmetic, not because your family is bad, because a family with nobody outside it looking in is a room with no window, and things grow in a room like that. The last one is the one that costs, so I will just say it once. If somebody is carrying every message between you and a person you love, then that somebody is deciding what you know about your own blood. Pick up the telephone yourself. Drive over there yourself. 4 years. I did not drive 400 miles because a woman in my kitchen told me a boy did not want to see me. 4 hours in a truck. That is what it would have cost me. 4 hours. In November, about 3 weeks after, I came out at daylight and there was a pickup parked at the corner of the horse trap, and my son was standing at the fence line with his hands in his pockets, looking at the posts. He did not apologize that morning. He has since, twice, badly, which is the only way he knows how, and I took it both times. That morning he just said, "I never looked at any of it, Dad. Not one page, not once." I said, "I know it." He said, "That is worse, is it not?" And I said, "It is. Come on, the pump on the north well is acting up." We did not talk about any of it again for about 5 months. We fixed fence. That is what men in my family do instead of talking, and I am not defending it, I am telling you what happened. Between November and April, the 3 of us rebuilt 2 miles of the East Line, and there were whole days when the only words spoken out loud were, "Hold that," and "Hand me the stretcher." Wade stayed. He never went back to finish that last semester, which I fought him about and lost. He is the one who does the books now, and he does them in a green ledger with a rubber band around it, and he does them at the kitchen table where the stack used to go, and he leaves it open where I can see it. I never asked him to do that. He just does. And the next October came around, the way it does. First morning cold enough to see your breath was the 9th. Wade came in before daylight and said, "It is time," and I said, "You do it." He said, "No, sir." I said, "Wade, you do it." So we built the fire in the wash tub out by the corner of the horse trap, and we heated my father's iron one time, and my grandson picked it up. And Neil came. He drove up while the iron was heating, and he got out, and he did not say much, and he stood there holding the water bucket, which is the job you give a man when you are not ready to give him a bigger one, and you want him there anyway. He knew it too. He held it the whole time. Wade laid that iron on the corner post and he rocked it. Heel to toe, easy, counting under his breath the way I taught him when he was 6 years old. And he lifted it clean, and there was the year, dark and even, sitting on top of 60-some other years, all the way down that post to the ground. Then he looked about 1.5 feet below his own mark, at that black smear from 1996 that could have been anything on God's earth, and he said, "Grandpa, why did you never pull this post and put a good one in? I have wanted to ask you that my whole life." Here is the answer. I have had ready for 20-some years. Because that mark is the only honest thing on the post. Every other year on there says a job got done right. That one says a 9-year-old boy was scared and did it anyway, and stayed. Anybody can put up a post with nothing but good years on it. All that takes is a fence and no children. But I will tell you the other thing I learned late, at 78, standing in a set of pens with 4 trucks idling. I spent 31 years teaching men that you read the brand and not the man telling you about the cow. A fellow can talk to you for an hour about where an animal came from and what he paid and who his daddy was, and none of it counts, because it is a story and stories are free. So you put your hand on the hide and you read what is burned into it, and then you go look in the book and see whose name is written next to that mark. That is not being suspicious. That is being fair to everybody, including the man talking. And it did not once occur to me in 31 years to do that with my own family. I took the story, 6 years of Sundays, I took the story and I signed the stack and I ate the pie. A pressed brand blotches, and a blotched brand belongs to nobody. That is true of a cow, and it turns out it is true of a family. Press down hard on people, hold them there, decide everything for them, and carry all their messages, and what you get is not ownership. What you get is a mark. Nobody can read, and nobody can claim, and nobody has to honor. You rock it. You lay it on easy, and you count, and you lift, and you let the thing take the mark on its own. Last spring, I drove to town and renewed the Rocking H for another 3 years, $14, and while I was there, I filed the paper that puts it in my grandson's name when I am done with it. It is recorded now, in a book, under a name, because that is the only way a thing like that goes anywhere. I am 78 years old, and I do not know how many more Octobers there are in that wash tub. But the post is standing, and the year is on it, and the boy can rock an iron clean. If you have a person out there you have not heard from in a while, and somebody has been telling you why, go find out for yourself. Do not wait until the trucks are backed up to the chute.